So today I'm going to be talking about Germany and women's suffrage and gender equality within it. So the women's movement in Germany started in the 19th century. Typically, before that, women would hold homemaker roles. However, the women on this screen are considered the leaders of the movement. So Louise Otto Peters fought for female participation in decision making and co founded the General German Women's Association in 1865. Helen Lange fought to emancipate girls and women through education and founded several suffragist groups. Clara Zetkin fought for stronger representation in trade unions, suffrage, and abortion rights, and also contributed to the founding of International Women's Day. So, though these women are considered the leaders, the movement as a whole was considered weak because it was dominated by moderates who didn't feel suffrage was that important of an issue. However, after World War I, Germany was eager to reform and reconstruct, so the Socialist Party proposed women's suffrage to the Weimar Republic, and it was passed in 1918 under Article 109 of the Weimar Constitution. As a way of thanks, in the 1919 election, women voted mostly socialists, and this was clear because in the election, voting was segregated by pink strips for females and blue strips for males. So this way, political parties could strategize for the next elections. However, this socialist surge of popularity would soon plummet after the Great Depression and the economic crisis it brought. By 1933, as you can see on this graph, unemployment rates were just under 35%, and by the 1932 election, about 1/3 of the labor force was unemployed. So by this election, women and Germans in general were eager for social change. So this led to a surge in popularity of parties like the NSDAP, which promised to return German prosperity. So the NSDAP, or the Nazis, won the 1932 election, and this put Adolf Hitler in power. So Adolf Hitler appointed himself Führer of Germany, and he felt that women's rights groups were created by Jews and communists, and this made him feel that they must be repressed, which led to the exclusion of women from politics altogether. And this was not the only change for women. Unmarried women were allowed to work in the Third Reich. However, once they were married, they were forcefully removed from the workforce. And young girls in schools were taught how to be an obedient wife and to embrace the role of motherhood, while boys were taught how to be soldiers and were also given regular educations. So naturally, women felt that this was taking steps back. However, they were not allowed to express their dissatisfaction because if they did or acted out a character of the German woman, they would be treated like any other person guilty of political dissidence, which meant they would be sent to concentration camps and later executed. So, another set of laws by the Germans was the Aryan marriage laws, which meant that people in the Aryan race, or those with blonde hair and blue eyes, were barred from marrying those outside of the race. Under these laws, the disabled and diseased populations of Germany were also barred from marriage. The Fuhrer also required his SS members, which was almost like an army, to father at least 4 children in or out of wedlock. And though the Nazi regime promoted marriage heavily, they provided Lebensborn homes for single mothers, which would provide aid in various forms and even adoptive parents if needed. In order to promote having more children, family income supplements were given to married couples for each children they had, and German women that had 4 or more children were given the Cross of Honor of the German Mother, as pictured here, because the Fuhrer felt that if they had 4 or more children, they were serving the country as women should. So after World War II and the fall of the Nazis, Germany was divided between the East and the West. So in the West, they typically had rights and views like the United States, since the United States did have an influence here. So welfare programs were geared towards the male breadwinner ideology, and women pretty much became homemakers again. However, in the East, women were required to be in the workforce. About 90% of women would work. Daycare programs were enacted, and marriage and family laws were reformed to include working women. Women were also part of political parties, while not very many were in political parties in the West. So in the West, the second women's movement came about because they demanded equal rights, and in 1977 they were granted equal rights in marriage, which meant that they could now get a divorce without their husband's permission. And for education advances in the East, by the 1960s, East German women made up about half of secondary school graduates, and that only continued to rise in later years. And in the West, German women weren't allowed into universities until the 1980s. However, they held more traditional views, and that is why it took longer for progress. And for modern gender equality issues, it took much longer for women to be able to have political careers. And that is evident because Rita Sue-Smith, the 10th president of Bundestag, was the first female president, and this was in the 1990s. However, she was considered an outlier for women. And even today, salaries for women range from 65 to 78% of a man's, depending on the career. So I deem this appropriate to rank Germany 18, because even though all women were granted right to vote in 1918, it took much longer for them to earn equality.